She spoke sign language to the billionaire's lonely son. What he did next changed everything. The language of love. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Harbor Hotel scattered diamonds of light across the polished marble floor as Chicago's wealthiest gathered in their evening finest. 28-year-old Grace Henderson tugged nervously at her borrowed emerald dress, the only formal attire she owned, feeling like an imposter among the designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. As a freelance sign language interpreter hired for the Chicago Medical Foundation's annual gala, she didn't belong among these elite patrons, but she desperately needed this job. Her rent was 3 weeks overdue, and her student loans loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Stay near the edges, be available but unobtrusive, her agency coordinator had instructed. 3 hours into the evening, no one had required her services, making Grace feel increasingly invisible as she watched Chicago's elite network and celebrate. That's when she saw him. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan was a man in his mid-30s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. While conversations swirled around him, he remained still, watchful, his eyes tracking speakers, mouths with careful intensity, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he observed visual cues with laser focus. Grace recognized the signs immediately. He was deaf, and despite being surrounded by hundreds of people, he was utterly alone. Her attention shifted as a ripple of excitement surged through the ballroom. Vincent Cross had arrived. The tech mogul's entrance commanded immediate attention, cameras flashing as photographers fought for position. Cross Technologies had revolutionized artificial intelligence, making its 42-year-old founder one of the richest men in America. Tonight, he was the foundation's honored guest, having pledged $20 million toward a new research facility. Grace watched as Chicago's elite swarmed him, everyone desperate for a moment with power and wealth personified. She glanced back at the man by the windows and noticed how he watched Cross with an expression that mixed professional respect with something darker. Then she saw it. The family resemblance in the sharp jawline and piercing blue eyes. This had to be Cross's son. Before she could overthink it, Grace crossed the ballroom. As she approached, the young man's eyes widened with surprise that someone was directly acknowledging him. "Hello," Grace signed, her hands moving through the greeting with practiced ease. "I'm Grace. What's your name?" The transformation was instantaneous. His carefully guarded expression shifted to genuine surprise, then something warmer. His hands moved in response, quick and elegant, with the fluency of a native signer. "I'm Ryan," he signed back, a slow smile spreading across his handsome face. "You know ASL?" His movements carried both excitement and disbelief. "Are you deaf too?" "No," Grace replied, her fingers dancing through the signs. "I'm an interpreter. I work with the Medical Foundation sometimes. The one my father donated to." Ryan signed, something complicated flickering across his face. "I'm here as the dutiful son for the photo opportunities." The cynicism in his expression told Grace volumes about his relationship with his father. "Well, until then," Grace signed, "would you like some company? Someone who actually communicates with you?" "God, yes," Ryan responded, and his smile transformed his entire face, making Grace's heart skip unexpectedly. "I've been lip-reading all night until my head pounds. Do you know how many people have discovered I'm deaf and immediately started shouting, as if volume somehow matters?" Grace smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "Or they over-enunciate every syllable like you're 5 years old." "Exactly," Ryan signed, his movements becoming more animated, more relaxed. "Or my personal favorite, when they find out I can't hear, they start talking to whoever I'm with about me, as if I've suddenly ceased to exist as a person capable of understanding." As they conversed, Grace watched Ryan transform. His shoulders lowered from their defensive hunch. His blue eyes, which had been carefully distant, now sparkled with intelligence, humor, and something else that made Grace acutely aware of how close they were standing. He was brilliant, articulate, and devastatingly handsome in a way that made her forget her professional boundaries. "I'm the VP of Innovation at Cross Technologies," Ryan explained when Grace asked what he did. "Officially, I oversee our AI ethics division and accessibility initiatives. Unofficially, I'm the token deaf executive who proves the company values diversity." Grace noted the bitterness beneath his words. "That sounds cynical." Ryan's hands hesitated. "Maybe I am cynical. My father hired me 3 years ago after I spent 6 years proving myself at competing firms. He likes to mention his deaf son in interviews about corporate responsibility, but at the office, he directs all communication through my assistant. We work on the same floor, and he's never once signed directly to me." "That must be incredibly isolating," Grace replied honestly, her heart aching for him. Ryan shrugged, though the gesture couldn't hide his pain. "It is what it is. At least I have my photography. I'm actually pretty good at it." "I'd love to see your work sometime," Grace told him, meaning it more than she should. Across the ballroom, Vincent Cross worked the crowd with practiced charisma, seemingly oblivious to his son's existence. Grace couldn't help noticing how Ryan's gaze occasionally drifted toward his father, longing and resentment warring in his expression, and something else, a desperate need for recognition that broke Grace's heart. "Your father seems very occupied tonight," Grace commented carefully. "He's always occupied," Ryan signed with sharp, mocking movements. "Cross Technologies doesn't run itself, you know. He's built quite the empire since my mother died. I'm very proud of him." The rehearsed quality of the statement was devastating. "When did your mother pass?" Grace asked gently. "When I was 10, Ryan's hands slowed, his expression becoming distant. That's when everything changed. Before that, our house was full of life, of connection. My mother was a violinist. Can you imagine? She made sure I experienced music through vibrations, through watching her perform, through the joy in her face when she played. After she died, the music stopped completely. Dad buried himself in building his company, and I became the problem son who needed managing. The problem. The deaf son. Ryan's signs became sharp, almost violent. The endless specialists, the experimental treatments, the therapies designed to fix what was broken. He spent years trying to restore my hearing, make me normal, make me acceptable. He never learned to sign, not one single word. We have interpreters at home, at the office, everywhere. He talks to them about me while I'm sitting right there. In his own house, he discusses me with strangers rather than communicate directly with me." Grace felt anger rising toward Vincent Cross. How could someone so accomplished fail so fundamentally at something so essential? "I'm sorry," she signed simply, knowing how inadequate it was. Ryan's shrug was practiced, defensive. "Like I said, it is what it is." He glanced over Grace's shoulder, and his expression shifted. "Speaking of the devil." Grace turned to see Vincent Cross approaching, flanked by a photographer and his executive assistant, a polished woman in her 40s. "Ryan," Cross said, his lips easy to read as he spoke loudly and deliberately, the way people do when they've never bothered to learn whether volume makes any difference. "We need you for photographs now." He didn't look at Grace, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. The assistant gestured efficiently for Ryan to follow. Ryan's face smoothed into an emotionless mask. Before following his father, he signed quickly to Grace, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "See what I mean? He doesn't even wonder who you are, or why you're talking to me. I'm just a prop for his charitable image." As Ryan walked away to stand beside his father for the photographers, Grace felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her. It wasn't just professional concern or empathy for a deaf person facing isolation. It was something deeper, more personal, and infinitely more dangerous given the circumstances. The evening continued, and Grace watched as Ryan performed his role with practiced perfection. Smiling at appropriate moments, nodding politely, standing perfectly still beside his father for photograph after photograph. Not once did Cross or anyone else attempt to include him in the conversations happening around them. When the formal program concluded and the crowd began to thin, Grace saw Ryan slip away toward a door leading to an outdoor terrace. Her heart made the decision before her mind could stop it, and she followed. Outside, the March night was surprisingly mild, the Chicago skyline glittering against the dark sky like a promise. Ryan stood at the stone railing, his broad shoulders tight with tension as he stared out at the city lights. Escaping. Grace signed as she approached. Ryan turned, and the relief that flooded his handsome face was profound, vulnerable in a way that made Grace want to comfort him. Just needed to breathe. He signed. Needed to stop performing. Stop watching lips. Stop pretending I don't notice everyone talking around me instead of to me. Before Grace could respond, the terrace door opened. Vincent Cross stepped out, his expression shifting from concern to confusion when he saw his son wasn't alone. "Ryan, it's time to leave," he said, looking at his son but making no effort to sign, to bridge the communication gap that had defined their relationship. Grace saw Ryan's face fall, saw the walls slam up between father and son, and in that moment, she made a choice that would alter the trajectory of her entire life. "Mr. Cross," she said aloud, while simultaneously signing for Ryan's benefit, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My name is Grace Henderson. I'm an interpreter, and I've been talking with your son tonight. He's extraordinary." Cross blinked, clearly taken aback by this direct approach from someone he likely viewed as service staff. "Thank you. Do you work for the foundation?" "Yes," Grace replied, continuing to sign even as her professional instinct screamed that she was crossing lines. "But right now, I'm just someone who thinks you should know what you're missing by not being able to communicate with Ryan directly." The billionaire's expression hardened, but Grace saw something else beneath the defensive anger. Shame, quickly masked but unmistakable. Ryan's eyes were wide, his hands frozen mid-air, shock and something that looked like admiration written across his face. "Miss Henderson," Cross said, his voice cold and controlled. "I appreciate your concern, but my relationship with my son is private." "With respect, Mr. Cross," Grace said, feeling her professional demeanor slip away completely. "Communication shouldn't be private. It should be accessible. Your son stood alone all evening while everyone celebrated your generosity. Can't you see the tragedy in that?" A flash of genuine hurt crossed Cross's face before his business mask returned, harder than before. "You've overstepped, Miss Henderson. Ryan, we're leaving." He turned toward the door, clearly expecting his son to follow without question, as he always had. Ryan hesitated, his eyes locked with Grace's, surprise and gratitude and something warmer burning in his gaze. "Grace," he signed quickly, "you didn't have to do that. You could lose your job." "Yes, I did," she signed back, her heart pounding. Someone needed to say it. Ryan's hands moved again, his signs carrying weight. "Find me tomorrow. Cross Technologies, 15th floor. Lunch at noon, if you're brave enough." Then he was gone, following his father inside, leaving Grace alone on the terrace with her racing heart, and the realization that she'd just risked everything for a man she'd known for less than 2 hours. The next morning, Grace woke to a voicemail from her agency coordinator, the tone leaving no doubt about its contents. "Grace, call me immediately. There's been a serious complaint about your conduct at the gala. This is extremely problematic." Her stomach dropped as she sat on the edge of her bed in her tiny studio apartment, staring at the stack of overdue bills on her desk. She was already behind on rent, her student loans were in forbearance, and she'd been living on rice and beans for weeks. She couldn't afford to lose clients. But as she remembered Ryan's face when she'd signed to him, the way his eyes had lit up with genuine connection for the first time all evening, she couldn't bring herself to regret what she'd done. Taking a deep breath, she called back, prepared for the worst. I can explain, Grace began when her coordinator answered. Though she had no idea what explanation would be acceptable. You certainly will explain, came the sharp reply. Vincent Cross's office called this morning. They've requested you specifically for a private meeting at Cross Technologies this afternoon at 2. Grace nearly dropped her phone, her hand trembling. They what? I have no idea what you did last night, but you've somehow caught the attention of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. This could be huge for our agency, Grace. Do not mess this up. The address is in the loop. Dress professionally. And for God's sake, try to be more diplomatic this time. 4 hours later, Grace found herself in the gleaming lobby of Cross Technologies, a glass and steel tower that seemed to pierce the sky. She rode the elevator to the executive floor, her pulse racing with each ascending number. A receptionist led her through corridors of modern art and floor-to-ceiling windows, offering breathtaking views of the city. She noticed several striking photographs on the walls, black and white images that captured emotion in ways that transcended sound. Mr. Cross's son took those, the receptionist commented, noticing Grace's interest. He's incredibly talented, though I don't think Mr. Cross fully appreciates it. Does Ryan photograph often? Grace asked, her heart warming at the mention of him. Every day, the woman replied with obvious fondness. He's converted one of the spare conference rooms into a darkroom. Says photography is how he processes the world. Mr. Cross doesn't understand it, but it makes Ryan happy. They arrived at Cross's corner office, a massive space with panoramic views of Lake Michigan. Vincent Cross stood as they entered, his commanding presence filling the room. Miss Henderson, thank you for coming. His tone was professionally neutral, revealing nothing. Please, sit. Grace took the offered chair, her mind racing through possibilities. Was this a formal reprimand? Legal action? An NDA she'd be required to sign? I owe you an apology, Cross said, surprising her completely. Sir, your words last night. He paused, clearly uncomfortable with vulnerability. They were inappropriate for that setting. But they weren't inaccurate. The admission seemed to cost him something significant. Grace sat back, reassessing everything. This wasn't what she'd expected at all. Mr. Cross, I apologize for my bluntness. It wasn't my place. Perhaps it was exactly your place, he interrupted, moving to sit behind his massive desk. You're the professional, after all. That's why I asked you here today. He placed his hands flat on the polished surface, a businessman organizing his thoughts. Ryan lost his hearing in the same car accident that killed his mother. He was 10 years old. The doctors said it was bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, nerve damage, complete and irreversible. Grace felt her throat tighten, remembering Ryan's words about the accident. I spent the next 4 years, Cross continued, his voice becoming clinical, consulting with specialists around the world. Pursuing every treatment, every experimental procedure, trying to restore what he'd lost. Trying to fix him, Grace said quietly. Cross winced, genuine pain flashing across his face. Yes, I couldn't accept that my son would never hear again. By the time I finally stopped fighting reality, we'd established patterns that proved impossible to break. Interpreters, specialists, distance. I paid people to communicate with him, so I wouldn't have to face my own inadequacy as a father. He reached for a framed photograph on his desk, turning it so Grace could see. A younger Cross with a beautiful woman and a small boy with a gap-toothed grin. Ryan, before the accident, before everything changed. My wife Sarah started teaching Ryan sign language when he was a baby, Cross said, his voice softening with memory. Baby signs, they called it. She believed in all forms of communication. She was a violinist, but she always said music was just one language among many. Ryan mentioned her, Grace said carefully, watching emotions play across Cross's face. Cross looked up sharply, vulnerability breaking through his businessman facade. He talked about Sarah. What did he say? Only that she made him feel music even though he couldn't hear it. Grace replied gently. That your house was once full of life and connection. Cross's hand trembled slightly as he set the photograph down. It was, after the accident, I couldn't bear to hear music anymore. I sold Sarah's violin, silenced the house completely. I told myself I was protecting Ryan from painful reminders. The truth is, I was protecting myself from grief I didn't know how to process. Despite her anger at how he'd treated Ryan, Grace felt her perspective shifting. This was a man shattered by loss, who'd coped by building walls instead of bridges. Mr. Cross, why exactly am I here? He straightened, his businessman facade returning. I want to hire you, Miss Henderson. Not through your agency, but directly. A personal contract to interpret for Ryan. No, he said firmly, surprising her again. To teach me sign language. I should have learned 14 years ago. I want to communicate with my son directly, without intermediaries between us. Grace sat back, genuinely surprised by his determination. That's commendable, Mr. Cross. But learning ASL takes significant time and consistent practice. It's not something you can master in a few intensive sessions. I'm aware, he replied. I'm prepared to commit to lessons 4 times weekly for the next 18 months at minimum. He named a figure for her compensation that made Grace's breath catch, an amount that would solve every financial problem she had. Would that interest you? It would change her life overnight. But money wasn't her only concern here. Before I answer, may I ask what changed between last night and this morning? Cross's expression softened almost imperceptibly, the businessman facade cracking. Last night, I watched my son's face when you spoke to him in sign language. I realized I haven't seen him look that alive, that present, that genuinely happy in years. Then this morning, he left this on my desk. He handed Grace a folded piece of paper, his hand not quite steady. Inside was a typed email, clearly printed out. Dad, I know you're probably angry about what happened with the interpreter last night. I'm emailing instead of using the office interpreter because I want you to actually read this without someone else's voice in the way. For 40 minutes last night, someone saw me. Not Cross's deaf son. Not the diversity hire. Not the problem you've been trying to fix for 14 years. Just me, Ryan. If you really want to honor Mom's memory with your donations and your charitable work, remember what she always said, true connection requires effort from both sides. We haven't truly connected since the accident. I don't know if we ever will again, but I wanted you to know that for 40 minutes last night, someone made that effort. It mattered more than I can express. Maybe think about that, Ryan. Grace carefully refolded the email, her throat tight with emotion, her heart aching for both father and son. I've spent 14 years, Cross said quietly, his voice raw, throwing money at my son's deafness, building accessible facilities, funding deaf education research, donating millions to organizations, all while failing to make the one investment that actually mattered, learning his language, learning to communicate with my own son. It's not too late, Grace said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Ryan's 29 years old, Cross replied, pain flashing across his face. He's been offered a chief technology officer position at a company in San Francisco. It's an extraordinary opportunity. He'll probably take it. He leaves in 4 months. Pride and devastation warred in his expression. I have a very limited window to repair what I've broken. Grace considered her response carefully, weighing professional ethics against the possibility of healing she'd witnessed last night. Mr. Cross, I'll teach you ASL, but you need to understand something crucial. Learning to sign is one thing. Rebuilding your relationship with Ryan is entirely different. One doesn't automatically lead to the other. You'll need to be patient, vulnerable, and willing to fail repeatedly before you succeed. I understand, he said, rising from his desk with renewed determination. I'm prepared to do whatever it takes. Now, there's someone else who wanted to see you before you left." As if on cue, the office door opened and Ryan entered, his blue eyes finding Grace immediately, his face lighting up with a smile that made her heart race. "You came," he signed, his movements quick with relief and unmistakable pleasure. "Your father invited me," Grace replied, acutely aware of how her pulse quickened whenever Ryan looked at her. Ryan's eyes moved between Grace and his father, confusion and wariness evident in his expression. "Why? Am I in trouble for what happened last night?" Cross cleared his throat awkwardly, looking at his son with an expression Grace couldn't quite read, something between regret and hope. "I'll let Miss Henderson explain. I have a board meeting in 5 minutes." He paused at the door, looking back at Ryan with obvious difficulty forming the words, "Ryan, we'll talk later." A real talk. Then he was gone, leaving father and son's unfinished business hanging in the air. After the door closed, Ryan's hands moved rapidly, his signs carrying urgency and concern. "What's happening? What did he say to you? Are you in trouble?" "Neither of us is in trouble," Grace assured him, her heart warming at his concern for her welfare. "Your father has hired me to teach him ASL." Ryan's hands froze mid-sign, his face cycling through disbelief, hope, fear, and something else Grace couldn't identify. "My father, learning sign language. You're joking. Tell me you're joking." "I'm not," Grace replied, watching emotions play across his handsome features. "He seems very determined this time." Ryan sank into the chair his father had vacated, his fingers moving slowly now, carefully, as if testing the weight of dangerous hope. He won't stick with it. He never does. He'll get too busy with work, or he'll decide it's too difficult, or he'll just lose interest like he always does with anything related to my deafness. I've been through this before, Grace. I can't. His hands faltered. I can't hope again just to be disappointed. "Maybe this time will be different," Grace suggested gently, though she understood his fear. Why would it be? Ryan's signs carried years of accumulated disappointment. What makes this time special? "Because this time," Grace said, choosing her words carefully, "he's not trying to fix you. He's trying to fix himself. Fix the relationship he knows he's damaged. That's different from all the other times." Ryan stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, vulnerability breaking through his defensive walls. "And you?" He signed slowly. "Why did you confront him last night? You could have lost your job. You don't even know me." Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks, aware of how close they were sitting, how his blue eyes seemed to see right through her professional facade. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "I saw you standing there alone, and I couldn't not say something. Couldn't walk away. That was either very brave or very foolish," Ryan signed. But his smile was warm, genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that made Grace's stomach flip. "Maybe both," Grace admitted, returning his smile. Ryan's hands moved again, his signs deliberate, weighted with meaning. "Have dinner with me tonight. Not as interpreter and client, not as my father's employee. Just as two people who want to know each other better." Grace knew she should say no, knew this crossed every professional boundary she'd been taught to maintain. But looking at Ryan's hopeful expression, the vulnerability in his eyes, she found herself signing yes before her rational mind could intervene. 6 weeks later, Grace sat across from Vincent Cross in a conference room at his office, watching him struggle through basic conversational signs. His frustration was palpable, as his fingers refused to cooperate, his businessman's need for immediate mastery warring with the reality of language acquisition. "This is impossible," he muttered, dropping his hands in defeat. "I'm too old to learn this." "You learned Mandarin for business expansion," Grace reminded him, having learned this detail during their sessions, "and Japanese for the Tokyo office." "That was different," Cross began, then stopped, aware of what he'd been about to say. "More important," Grace supplied neutrally, one eyebrow raised. Cross had the grace to look deeply ashamed. I was going to say easier, but you're right to call me out. Every time. Over the past 6 weeks, Grace had discovered unexpected depths to Vincent Cross. Brilliant in business but emotionally stunted by grief. Capable of intense focus when motivated but blind to what mattered most. Genuinely trying to change but handicapped by years of avoidance and guilt. Let's try something different, Grace suggested, shifting her approach. Instead of business vocabulary, let's practice phrases you might actually want to say to Ryan. Personal things that matter. Cross shifted uncomfortably in his executive chair, clearly unused to discussing emotions. Such as, "How about, 'I'm proud of you,'" Grace said. That's something every child needs to hear, regardless of age. Something flickered across Cross's face, pain mixed with regret. Doesn't he know I'm proud of him? I've told the board. I've mentioned it in interviews. When was the last time you told him directly? Grace asked gently but firmly. Cross didn't answer, his silence speaking volumes. Let me show you, Grace said, demonstrating the sign. I'm proud of you. The movement was simple, but loaded with emotional weight. Cross watched intently, then mimicked her movements with surprising grace for someone who'd spent 14 years avoiding this exact form of communication. Perfect, Grace encouraged, genuine praise in her voice. Now, try, I love you. The simple sign, pinky, index finger, and thumb extended, seemed to overwhelm him with its directness, its vulnerability. After attempting it once, Cross stood abruptly and walked to the window overlooking the city, his back to Grace. Mr. Cross. I haven't said those words to Ryan since Sarah died, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, his back still to Grace. Not aloud and certainly not in sign. I can barely think them without, he trailed off. Why not? Grace asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Cross turned, and she saw his carefully constructed composure finally cracking, revealing the grieving man beneath the billionaire facade. Because every time I look at him, I see Sarah. I see what we lost in that accident. I see my failure to protect them both. I see the son I should have been there for but wasn't. Understanding dawned fully. The accident. You were driving. Cross nodded once, sharply, his jaw tight. Black ice on Lake Shore Drive. An 18-wheeler jackknifed ahead of us. I swerved to avoid a collision and hit the median barrier instead. His voice became clinical, detached, the only way he could tell this story. Sarah died on impact. Ryan was in the back seat. The trauma from the collision caused bilateral hearing loss. When he woke up in the hospital 3 days later, he couldn't hear anything. Not the machines beeping. Not the doctors talking. Not me telling him his mother was gone, that everything would be okay, even though nothing would ever be okay again. That wasn't your fault, Grace said gently, her heart aching for both father and son. Tell that to my 10-year-old son who woke up in a silent world without his mother. Bitterness edged Cross's words. Years of self-recrimination evident. For months after, he would scream at night. Horrible, raw sounds. He couldn't hear himself, couldn't regulate his own voice. I couldn't comfort him. Nothing I did helped. The only thing that calmed him was drawing, creating visual representations of what he couldn't express in words. He'd sit for hours making these dark, chaotic images that his therapist said represented his trauma, his grief, his isolation. And now he's a photographer, Grace observed quietly. An exceptional one, Cross agreed, a hint of pride finally breaking through the pain. He's built a significant following on social media. His work has been featured in major galleries, but I've never told him how extraordinary his talent is. I've treated it as a hobby, something he does on the side, when it's actually who he is at his core. The lesson continued, but Grace's mind kept returning to Ryan. to the dinners they'd shared over the past 6 weeks, the long walks along the lakefront, the hours of conversation in sign that flowed more naturally than any communication she'd ever experienced. They'd carefully avoided labeling what was developing between them, both aware of the complications her position as his father's ASL teacher created. But the connection was undeniable, growing stronger and more intimate each time they met. That evening, Grace met Ryan at their usual cafe near his office, a small place where the deaf barista knew them both by name and always had their orders ready. These meetings had evolved from casual dinners into the highlight of Grace's week, moments she found herself counting down to with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. As she approached, Ryan was already signing animatedly with the barista, and seeing him in his element, confident and vibrant and utterly himself, made her heart clench with feelings she was no longer trying to deny. He spotted her, and his entire face lit up in a way that made her stomach flip, that made her forget every professional boundary she was supposed to maintain. "You're late," he signed teasingly as she sat across from him, his blue eyes warm with affection. "Your father's lesson ran over," Grace replied, accepting the coffee he'd already ordered for her, their fingers brushing in a touch that sent electricity through her. "He's actually improving faster than I expected. Faster than most adult learners I've worked with." Ryan's expression shifted, hope and skepticism warring as they always did when they discussed his father. "Really? You're not just saying that to make me feel better." "Really," Grace confirmed, her signs emphatic. "He's dedicated, Ryan. He struggles with some of the more complex grammatical structures, but his vocabulary is expanding quickly. More importantly, he's trying. He asks about you every session, wants to know what you like, what you're working on, how to talk to you about things that matter." Ryan was quiet for a moment, his hands moving slowly, carefully. "I don't know what to do with that information. After 14 years of him refusing to even try, suddenly he's learning. What am I supposed to do with these feelings?" "What feelings?" Grace asked gently, though she could see the conflict written across his handsome face. Ryan's signs became more emphatic, more raw. Anger that it took him 14 years, hope that maybe things could actually be different this time, fear that he'll give up and it'll hurt worse than if he'd never started, resentment that it took a stranger confronting him before he'd even consider learning, guilt for feeling resentment when he's finally trying. All of it at once. Grace. All of it tangled up until I can't separate one feeling from another. Grace reached across the table and took his hand, the touch now familiar, but no less electric, no less significant. "You don't have to sort through all those feelings right now. You can just let them exist. You can be angry and hopeful at the same time. You can resent the past and still want a better future." Ryan's fingers intertwined with hers, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm that made her breath catch. "You make everything seem possible," he signed one-handed, his eyes intense on hers. "Even healing things I thought were permanently shattered." Grace felt her professional boundaries dissolving completely, her heart overriding every rational thought. "Ryan, I need to tell you something." "What?" His single-handed sign was questioning, concerned. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she admitted, the signs feeling both terrifying and necessary, liberating and dangerous. "And I don't know what to do about it because I'm teaching your father and there are professional ethics and complications and—" Ryan's kiss stopped her signing, his hand cupping her face as he leaned across the small table between them. The cafe disappeared. The world narrowed to just this, his lips on hers, gentle but sure, conveying everything words and signs couldn't express. When he pulled back, his signs were emphatic and clear, no hesitation. "I've been falling for you since you crossed that ballroom 6 weeks ago. Since you saw me when everyone else looked through me. Since you risked your job to tell my father the truth. Since our first dinner when you laughed at my jokes and saw me as more than my deafness. I don't care about complications or ethics or any of it. I just want to be with you. Grace smiled, her heart racing. Every professional instinct screaming warnings she chose to ignore. Your father might care. He might fire me. Let me worry about my father. Ryan signed, his expression determined. Right now, I just want to be here with you. To stop pretending this is casual when it's the most significant thing that's happened to me in years. They sat in the cafe until closing, hands entwined across the table, signing with their free hands, creating their own private world where communication flowed effortlessly and touch spoke louder than any words. As they finally left, walking along the darkened Chicago streets with Ryan's arm around her shoulders, Grace knew she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But looking up at his face, seeing the joy there, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. 3 weeks later, Grace faced her most difficult conversation yet. She sat across from Vincent Cross in his office, her heart pounding as she prepared to tell him about her relationship with Ryan. She'd rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, her carefully planned words deserted her completely. Mr. Cross, there's something I need to tell you about Ryan and me. Before I continue teaching you, you need to know that Ryan and I have, she faltered, unusual for someone whose profession was clear communication. I know, Cross said simply, surprising her into silence. You know? Grace repeated, stunned. I've known for 3 weeks, Cross replied, a slight smile playing at his lips. My son is happier than I've seen him since before the accident. He smiles at his phone constantly, leaves the office precisely at 5. Actually seems to enjoy his life instead of just moving through it. He hums while he works, even though he can't hear it. It wasn't difficult to deduce why. Are you angry? Grace asked carefully, prepared for termination, for accusations of unprofessional conduct. Cross was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. No, he finally said. Grateful, actually. You've given him something I never could. Joy. Real connection. Someone who sees him as a complete person, not a disability to manage or a problem to solve. I don't deserve your understanding, Grace said honestly. Perhaps not, Cross agreed with unexpected warmth. But you have it nonetheless, on one condition. What condition? Grace asked, tension returning. Don't stop teaching me, Cross said, his voice carrying genuine plea. I need to learn to communicate with my son, especially now. I'd like the chance to actually talk with him about his life, about you, about everything I've missed for 14 years. I want to be part of his happiness instead of just observing it from a distance. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. I won't stop. I promise. I'm committed to helping you rebuild this relationship. 10 weeks later, Grace stood in Ryan's apartment, a beautiful loft space in the West Loop with gorgeous natural light that he'd converted into a combination living space and photography studio. She was helping him prepare dinner while he signed animatedly about a new project at work. The ease between them now so natural it felt like breathing, like they'd been together for years instead of months. The doorbell rang, and Ryan's expression shifted to nervous anticipation mixed with apprehension. That's my father, right on time. Grace knew this dinner had been Ryan's idea, a test of whether the fragile peace they'd been building over the past months could survive a real family meal, could translate into actual relationship. She squeezed Ryan's hand reassuringly before he went to answer the door, her own stomach tight with nerves about how this evening would unfold. Vincent Cross entered carrying a bottle of wine and an expression of determined hopefulness that reminded Grace of someone about to take a crucial business meeting. He was dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, in slacks and a sweater instead of his usual suit. Ryan. Cross signed carefully, the movement still somewhat stiff but clear and deliberate. Thank you for inviting me to your home. Of course, Ryan signed back, though tension was visible in the set of his shoulders, in the way his hands moved with careful precision. Grace watched father and son navigate the awkwardness of this moment, both trying so hard, but unsure of the steps. Dinner started with painful awkwardness, conversation stilted despite everyone's best efforts. Cross struggled with some of Ryan's faster signing, requiring Grace to occasionally interpret, which made Ryan pull back, creating more distance. But gradually, as wine flowed and Grace helped bridge occasional communication gaps without making either man feel inadequate, something shifted. The atmosphere warmed. Cross asked about Ryan's photography work, really asked with specific questions that showed genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "I never knew you were documenting the deaf community in Chicago," Cross signed, his movements slow but earnest. "The series you showed me on your laptop is extraordinary, powerful, important work." Ryan's surprise was evident, his hands hesitating before responding. "You never asked before." "I should have," Cross admitted, his signing carrying visible emotion despite his limited vocabulary. "I should have asked about everything. About your work, your life, your passions, your dreams. I'm asking now if you'll give me the chance." Ryan glanced at Grace, who gave him an encouraging nod, staying quiet to let father and son have this moment. The rest of dinner passed with increasingly natural conversation. Cross asked about Ryan's photography techniques, his upcoming gallery showing, his thoughts on AI accessibility at the company. Ryan, gradually relaxing, found himself explaining his latest project with growing enthusiasm, his hands moving faster as his father struggled but persevered to understand. As Cross was preparing to leave, he paused at the door, clearly steeling himself for something difficult. "Ryan, there's something I've been wanting to say." He took a deep breath, then signed with careful deliberation. The movements Grace had spent hours helping him perfect. "I'm proud of you. Of the man you've become, the work you do, the life you've built. I'm proud of you despite my failures as a father. Not because I had anything to do with your success. I love you. I should have said it every day for the past 14 years. I'm saying it now, and I'll keep saying it." Ryan stood frozen, years of guarded emotions playing across his face like clouds racing across the sky. Disbelief, hope, pain, healing. Then he stepped forward and embraced his father, and Cross held his son tightly, both their eyes closed against tears. Grace quietly moved to the kitchen, giving them privacy for this moment she'd helped create, but that belonged entirely to them. When they finally separated, both men's eyes were red, but their expressions held something that hadn't been there before. Not just hope, but the beginning of actual connection. After Cross left, Ryan turned to Grace and pulled her close, his signs emotional against her shoulder. "Thank you for believing we could be healed, for seeing possibility when all I saw were broken pieces, for loving me enough to help me find my father again." Grace kissed him softly, her heart full. "You did the hard work, both of you. I just stood beside you and believed it was possible." 1 year later, Grace stood in a small garden venue overlooking Lake Michigan, the same lake she'd gazed at from the hotel terrace the night she'd first met Ryan. Now she was preparing to marry him, surrounded by friends and family in a ceremony that would be fully bilingual, conducted in both ASL and spoken English, with deaf and hearing guests mingling freely in a celebration of love that transcended sound. Vincent Cross approached her before the ceremony began, his signing now fluent and natural, the result of a year of dedicated practice. "Grace, may I speak with you?" "Of course," she signed, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "I wanted to thank you." Cross signed, his expression open in a way it never had been when they first met. "For teaching me ASL, yes, but more than that, for giving me back my son. For showing me that it's never too late to choose connection over isolation, vulnerability over protection, love over fear." "I don't know if I deserve your gratitude," Grace said honestly. "You deserve it and more," Cross replied. "You saw what I couldn't see. You chose courage when I chose cowardice. You love my son enough to risk everything, including your career, your financial security, your professional reputation. You changed both our lives." Grace felt tears threatening her carefully applied makeup. "Your son changed my life just as much. He taught me that the best connections happen when we're brave enough to truly see each other." The ceremony began with late afternoon sun, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. As Grace walked down the aisle, she saw Ryan waiting for her, his face radiant with joy, with love, with a happiness that made her breath catch. His father stood beside him as best man, and the significance of that placement, of Cross standing proudly beside the son he'd once kept at arm's length, made Grace's tears finally spill over. When they exchanged vows, they signed them to each other, their hands speaking promises more powerful than any words. "I see you," Ryan signed, his blue eyes locked with hers, swimming with emotion. "In a world that tried to make me invisible, you saw me completely, wholly, without reservation. You taught me that love isn't about being fixed or completed or made whole. It's about being witnessed and valued exactly as you are. It's about choosing each other, every day, in all our imperfect glory." Grace's hands trembled as she signed her response, her heart so full she could barely contain it. "I see you. I've always seen you, from that first moment in the ballroom when you stood alone in a crowd, and I choose you, every day, in every way, for the rest of our lives, in silence and in sound, in joy and in sorrow, in all the languages we speak and all the ways we communicate. I choose you, Ryan, always." When they kissed, the crowd erupted in applause, hands waving in the air in the deaf community's celebration, a sea of moving hands like flowers in the wind. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Grace caught Cross's eye. He was openly crying, signing "I love you" to his son, and Ryan, without hesitation, signed it back with a smile that held no bitterness, only hope and healing and new beginnings. At the reception, as Grace and Ryan danced their first dance to music neither could hear, but both could feel through vibrations and movement, and the pure joy of being together, Vincent Cross approached them. "May I?" He signed to Grace, and she stepped back, understanding that father and son needed this moment. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Cross signed to Ryan, his movements carrying all the emotion he'd suppressed for 14 years. "I'm sorry I let fear and grief keep me from knowing you, from being the father you deserved." Ryan's hands moved carefully, deliberately. "I'm sorry too, for pushing you away when you finally started trying, for assuming you'd never change, for not believing healing was possible. We both made mistakes. It took someone believing in both of us," Cross signed, glancing at Grace with obvious affection. "She taught me that communication isn't just about words or signs. It's about choosing to show up, to be vulnerable, to keep trying even when it's hard, even when you fail." Ryan smiled, his hands moving with warmth. "She taught me the same thing, that love is a choice we make every day, not a feeling that just happens to us." 4 years after that perfect wedding day, Grace sat in her office at the Cross Foundation for Deaf Connection and Communication, reviewing scholarship applications for their expanded program. The foundation, jointly funded by Vincent and Ryan Cross with Grace as executive director, had grown beyond her wildest dreams. They now served over 300 families annually, employed a diverse staff of 40, including 25 deaf employees, and had become a national model for deaf accessibility and education. A knock on her doorframe made her look up. Ryan stood there, signing with barely contained excitement, his entire body vibrating with energy. "I have news. Big news." Grace's hands moved quickly, reading his excitement. "Good news, or terrifying news. Both, Ryan signed, coming to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. I've been offered a position, Chief Innovation Officer at Cross Technologies, reporting directly to the board. Dad wants me to help lead the company into the next decade, eventually take over as CEO when he retires in 5 years. Grace's eyes widened. Your father's company, the one where you were once just a token diversity hire. Ryan nodded, his expression mixing disbelief with cautious joy with pride. My father's company. He created the position specifically for me. Says he trusts my vision for the future of accessible technology. Says I've earned this, not because I'm his son, but because I'm the best person for the role. How do you feel about that? Grace asked, watching emotions play across his beloved face. Terrified, Ryan admitted, but also excited. We've rebuilt our relationship over 4 years. We actually communicate now, actually understand each other. He knows my ideas, respects my work, values my perspective. He's asking me to help shape the company's future, not just exist in it as decoration. That's incredible. Grace signed sincerely, pride filling her chest. You've earned this, Ryan. There's more, Ryan continued, his hands moving more slowly now, more deliberately. We're going to need a bigger house. Why? Grace asked, though her heart was already accelerating, hope blooming. Ryan pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to her with shaking hands. Inside were adoption papers and a photograph of a 7-year-old deaf boy with bright eyes and a tentative smile. His name is Michael, Ryan explained, his signs emotional. He's been in foster care for 3 years since his deaf mother died in an accident. The system hasn't found a placement that can communicate with him. He's isolated, scared, increasingly withdrawn. The social worker thought that we could. Yes, Grace signed emphatically, tears already streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. We'll get the bigger house. We'll make room. We'll give him the family he deserves. Ryan pulled her close, and they sat together in the quiet office, looking at the photograph of the little boy who would soon become their son, both of them crying happy tears for the family they were building through choice and love and determination. 8 months later, Grace watched Ryan and Michael playing in the backyard of their new house in Lincoln Park, a beautiful home with space for Michael's room, Ryan's photography studio, and Grace's home office. Michael's initial wariness had gradually melted over months of patient, consistent love as he realized he'd found a home where everyone signed, where he wasn't different or broken, where communication flowed freely and naturally. Vincent Cross visited every Sunday for family dinners, his relationship with Ryan now rich and multifaceted, built on years of hard work and genuine effort. He'd become a doting grandfather to Michael, and watching him sign with the boy, patient and loving and fully present, healed something in Ryan that had been broken for decades. The man who'd once refused to learn a single sign now taught ASL classes at the foundation, sharing his journey from isolation to connection with other hearing parents of deaf children. As Grace watched her family, she thought about that night 4 years ago when she'd crossed a ballroom to speak to a lonely man standing by the windows. One choice, one moment of choosing connection over comfort, courage over convention. And it had changed not just 2 lives, but now 4, with ripples extending outward to every family the foundation served, every parent who learned that love speaks every language, especially the ones we learn for each other. Ryan came inside with Michael riding on his shoulders, both of them signing excitedly about the garden they were planning, about the photo project they wanted to start together. After they'd settled Michael with his art supplies at the kitchen table, drawing with the same focused intensity Ryan had once shown, Ryan pulled Grace aside, his expression tender. I have something for you. He signed. He handed her a small wrapped package, his blue eyes warm with love. Inside was a photograph Ryan had taken, a stunning image of 2 hands intertwined, one wearing a wedding ring, backlit by golden hour sun, signing the word forever. The composition was breathtaking, intimate and universal at once. Below it, a small plaque read, "For Grace, who taught me that the most profound conversations happen in silence. That love doesn't need sound to be understood. That healing begins when someone chooses to see you, truly see you, without reservation or fear. Thank you for seeing me, for loving me, for building this beautiful, chaotic, perfectly imperfect life with me. Forever, your Ryan." Grace looked up at her husband, at their son drawing happily nearby, at the life they'd built together through patience and communication and love that transcended every barrier. She signed simply, her hand steady and sure. "I see you. I'll always see you. In every moment, in every language, in every way that matters, forever." And in that moment, surrounded by the family they'd created through choice and courage and the willingness to bridge every divide, Grace understood the deepest truth she'd ever known. Love doesn't speak one language. It speaks all of them, especially the ones we're brave enough to learn for each other. It sees past differences to the heart of what matters: connection, vulnerability, the courage to show up fully for another person and say, "I see you, I choose you, I will learn your language because you matter more than my comfort." If this story of love, healing, and the power of choosing connection over isolation touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to build bridges, to learn new ways of communicating, to choose love over fear. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories into the world. As Grace tucked Michael into bed that night, signing him a story about a boy who found his forever family, she reflected on the journey that had brought them all here. From a desperate freelancer at a charity gala to the executive director of a thriving foundation, from a woman who'd risked everything for a stranger to a wife and mother, building a life beyond her wildest dreams, from one moment of courage to a lifetime of love. Michael's small hands signed a question, "Are you and Daddy my forever family?" Grace felt her heart expand impossibly larger. "Forever and always." She signed back, kissing his forehead. "We chose you, just like Daddy and I chose each other. That's what makes us family, not blood or hearing or any of that. We choose each other, every single day." After Michael fell asleep, Grace found Ryan in his studio, editing photographs from a recent project documenting deaf families across Chicago. She wrapped her arms around him from behind, and he turned, pulling her close. "Best day ever," he signed, a question they asked each other often. "Best day ever," Grace confirmed. "But tomorrow will be even better, and the day after that. Every day with you is the best day." Ryan kissed her, soft and lingering, then signed against her lips. "I never believed in fate until I met you. Now I think maybe everything, all the pain and isolation and struggle, brought us exactly where we needed to be. Maybe we found each other at exactly the right moment." "Not fate," Grace signed back, her hands cupping his face. "Choice. We chose to see each other. We chose to be brave. We chose love even when it was complicated and risky and crossed every boundary. We chose this, Ryan, every step of the way." As they stood together in the quiet studio, surrounded by Ryan's photographs documenting life and love in the deaf community, Grace knew with absolute certainty that she would make that same choice again and again. To cross that ballroom, to risk her job, to confront a powerful man, to fall in love with his son, to build this impossible, beautiful, perfectly imperfect life. Because some things are worth the risk. Some people are worth learning new languages for. Some love stories are worth every complication, every barrier crossed, every moment of fear overcome by courage. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply see someone, really see them, and choose connection over comfort. Thank you for joining us on this journey of love, healing, and the transformative power of choosing to see each other fully. If this story moved you, Please subscribe and share it with others who need to hear this message. Remember that every day offers us choices: to build walls or bridges, to protect ourselves or risk connection, to stay comfortable or be brave. Choose bridges, choose risk, choose love. Until next time, may you see and be seen in all the languages that matter most.